Hi, so I'm back again. This is Professor Barry Brennan. I'm here to talk about interpersonal communication culture. This is part 3 of the video. And we left off, we just talked about different regions of the United States and how much where we grow up and live in our life experience regionally, depending on whether we live in the South or the East Coast or the West Coast or the Southwest or the Northwest or the Northeast, all influences how we think. That in itself has a cultural influence on the way we see things. I'm going to go straight to the PowerPoint and we're going to continue on with our discussion. So characteristics of culture. What do we mean by that when we're talking about characteristics? Characteristics include like our attitudes, beliefs, the language that we speak, the customs and rituals that we have, our behaviors, what do we believe in, our religion, our faith practices, and the food we eat. Man, that's my favorite because I love to cook and I love to make all kinds of different crazy things. And there are certain kinds of foods I like more than others. And then art, music, and drama. Like, what kind of music do you like? Are you a person that loves Spanish music, and what does that mean? Or do you like certain kinds of, like, I love salsa music. If you're, I'm trying to think of that. There's certain kind of music that it's in Asia right now, and I can't think of the K-pop. Is it K-pop? I think it might be K-pop. So that's also parts of culture too, as well. Maybe that's Japanese. I'm not sure. You can tell my age right now. So we'll just keep moving on. Okay. At least I do know it's K-pop. So culture is learned. I love this. Notice it's the first thing we say about culture. It's learned. It means you could take a little Latinx kid here from Fresno County. It's a baby. He or she is a baby. Okay, it's not a it. Yeah, let's say it's a she. She's a baby, and she gets adopted because her parents died in a car crash or something like that, and so she gets adopted. There's no family here to take her, and she gets adopted by Canadian parents. Usually I say like Chinese or something, but let's just say Canada. Okay, Canadian parents or New Zealand. If you know anything, you probably don't know New Zealand, but so let's go to Canada. So here's this child. Let's say her family's from Mexico. She's a Mexican child. She's growing up in Canada with Canadians, to Canadian parents that are, let's say they're French Canadian. Okay, so they're Anglo looking. And she even talks about, when she grows up, she talks like a Canadian. Okay, she doesn't have any Spanish, anything in her, because this is a culture she grew up in. It's learned. You could go the opposite way. You could take a child from China, which people do adopt, right, internationally, have that child grow up with parents, let's say African American parents in the United States. That child is going to grow up in Black culture, right? Is going to learn certain, maybe if let's say it's Black Creole culture, right? Like their family's from like Louisiana. So they're going to grow up eating certain foods and have certain likes and dislikes, and they're going to talk like their parents, right? They might look Chinese, but they've learned a different culture. So it is learned, folks. It's learned. It's not something that's genetic. It's totally learned. It's also dynamic. Dynamic means it's ever changing and evolving. Remember we talked about communication? Ongoing, a process, ongoing, interactional. Well, so is culture. Culture is totally dynamic. It is not, what's the word I want? Rigid, or you have traditions, and people like to hold traditions. Traditions generally are not necessarily rigid, but the traditions fall within certain situations, right? So traditions are important, but it's also a dynamic part of the way to express someone's culture or to express your culture. It's a way to continue culture. That's why language is so important. And it's dynamic. It's powerful. It's energetic. It's pervasive. So culture is everywhere in the way we do things. For example, the United States. I want you to think about this for a minute. We're a car culture. This country, we love cars, especially if we're in California. We love cars. I don't think in other cultures there's people have as many cars as they do here. We love the automobile. That's part of it's pervasive everywhere. Right? Cars are everywhere. What else do we love? We like to shop. Americans like to shop. Shop for things we don't even need. It's pervasive. So we have these culture performances and traditions that we do, and it's everywhere. Culture's everywhere. It's how we express ourselves. Aspects of culture. We're going to look at collectivism versus individualistic, and high context versus low context. So individualistic culture, when I say privilege is the individual, it means their traditions, their customs, maybe their rules and their laws are driven by what happens for the individual, what kind of rights or behaviors that's going to help the individual. We, the United States, this American culture, is an individualistic culture. We privilege the individual. Let's talk about, we have a perfect example of why people are having such a hard time of putting on masks for the pandemic. Why? Because first of all, we're not used to having our freedoms limited. We're used to going about as we want to. That is the culture that we live in. We can get up in the morning, we can go wherever we want, whenever we want, stay as long as we want. We have no one watching over us. We have a lot of freedom. Now we've been told you have to wear a mask for the greater whole. Well, if your whole culture has not even thought about the greater whole, but only thought about yourself or maybe your family, whatever your little corner of the world is, you're now asking us to change the lens of which we've been looking through forever. And again, I'm not making excuses, so don't take it that way, because I'm actually believe that collectivism is better for everyone. But this has been our culture, to be individualistic. So you're having people then protest against, why are you making me do this thing? Because people haven't been made to think that way. It's just a good example of that. So collectivism, they privilege the group over the individual. The group, the care for the group, the welfare of the group is more important than each individual person. A lot of Latin cultures, Asian cultures are like that. Okay? Are more collectivistic. They think about the whole rather than the part. High context versus low context. What does that mean? Now we're talking about more of the situational and atmosphere and situations that you find yourself. Is it high context or low context? High context means there's a lot of thought and energy put into how things are placed, how people behave, what people wear. It all has meaning. I like to say there's more meaning in the nonverbal than there is in the verbal. And it doesn't mean people don't talk to each other, but there's a lot of meaning in the context. High context. There's a lot of meaning in that situation that is happening, right? In the tradition, there's a lot of meaning in that the people of the culture know what that means. Okay? Generally speaking, high context cultures, a good example would be Asian cultures are high context. There's a lot of meaning in everything. Let's think of like Japan. Think of the way their homes are shaped. Think about feng shui, right? If you don't know what feng shui is, it's a belief system, and it comes out of, I don't know whether it's Chinese or Japanese, it could be both. It comes out of this belief that You should have the window a certain way. You should never have a mirror facing the window. It all has to do with energetically how things are placed. Again, high context. It's not about the person, it's about the situation you find yourself in has all this meaning. Low context is, it's not, the meaning is in what we say, how we talk, right? Words are very important to communicate with. High context puts a privilege on what's non-verbally. Low context culture privileges verbal communication, what is being said, the words. The American culture is very low context. Our words, what we say, doesn't mean that what we do is not important, but what we say holds a lot of weight. We have less need to have our outside environment resemble us as much as us as an individual and our words that we use. Okay. Moving along. There's a lot to say in this thing. How do we become competent, a communicator across cultures? How do we do that? Well, we got to want to know. You got to ask. You know, I always get in trouble because I ask a lot of questions, and sometimes then I have to step back and go, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be nosy, but that's who I am. That's how I find out things, right? I want to ask the person that's from that culture or from that community what something means or what that's about. I want to know from that person. I don't want to read it in a book, right? I could read stuff in a book, but it's much more interesting. Like when I was talking about my Hmong students, when my Hmong students would share with me, like I had one student in a class, she made these particular drinks, you know, those bobas, that stuff. Well, she made this particular mango drink that she makes at a place that I don't know if she worked there or owned it. I don't remember what that was. But when this, like another student shared with me about it wasn't a mating ritual. It was more like a get to know you ritual between the opposite sex when you throw the ball back and forth and you talk to each other. I was talking about this earlier. You know, a student told me about that, right? How do I get to know about these things? I get to know about these things because students share that with me and I ask questions. I want to know, what does it mean? You have to have understanding and then apply that understanding, right? So when you become aware. So, you know, I'll ask when I am face to face with my Hmong students, or I'll ask them about that. I'll be aware that there's a New Year celebration, what that means, the importance of it, right? This is, again, how do we become a competent communicator? We also practice our own awareness of what we don't know, awareness of what we do, and accept that people have different ways of behaving, right? Accept that people have different ways of seeing the world, different ways of practicing their culture that's different than ours. And finally, with that, you get to become more competent in your own ability to work with others. No one's ever going to become totally competent at someone else's culture if they weren't born into it. But you can have a greater understanding if you, one, have an open mind and you actually seek to learn, right? And the other part about acceptance and self-awareness is about having an open heart. They're never going to say that in academia, have an open heart, but I'm going to tell you, have an open mind and an open heart. You may not agree, like, for example, I know all about the festival where dogs are sold, and there's like, they have a farm for dogs in China, and I don't remember what the name of it is, and they're sold to eat. You know, I'm never going to go for that, right? Because I'm a big old pet lover. So I'm never in my life ever going to go for that. But I can understand it, right? I can understand it. I can understand what's the difference. Just like I brought you up. Why do I eat cows? Right? There's nothing like a good steak. That's bad. I've been vegan, right? So that's bad for people who are against that and could come up with all the reasons why we shouldn't do that. I get that. But if you want to be competent across cultures, then what you do is start to become tolerant.